customary for MDs to kind of give a background about who pays you, where does your money come from, right? I have research support from some foundations and NIH. Sometimes people ask if I do video game research for video game companies, and I don't. I do take donations from the companies to offset some of the costs. You can see at the bottom there, my mom's a librarian, but I have to say this always, I am really not a video gamer. I do not play video games every day. My kids do. And one of the things I noticed is that kids are so absolutely fixated on their video games that I can call my son to dinner like 6 times before he actually hears me. Anyone have that experience recently? I think that those addictive qualities, those engaging qualities are what we really want to harness, because it's hard to tell a kid, take a blood test, get in a scanner. It's a lot easier to say, why don't you try this game? That's how I got to this place. So we were to submit some objectives about our talk, and I hope I get through these, that you can see a couple of examples of video games for different conditions. There's a good database I want you to know about to look at the evidence base around video games. I've been focused on schizophrenia for a long time, and therefore the 3 things I'll talk about: an off-the-shelf game, Dance Dance Revolution, a game we made to rescue special needs kids, and then a neurocognitive training game. Those were all in service to the kids with schizophrenia that I think have some of the worst diseases out there. And some journals about games for health. So some people think this is sort of a frivolous topic, or that games don't really belong in academia. And so I hope that I can convince some of you that there is a place for this, and that this is a legit sort of pathway or a route to deliver a therapy. It's also hard for people to believe that a game can actually change your brain. But those of us who prescribe medications realize that the medications do have strong effects. We also know therapy, talk therapy, individual therapy, group therapy, has strong effects, and we can show pre and post therapy that the brain changed using fMRI techniques and other techniques, and we can see big changes. So it seems like a little bit of a stretch at first to think that a video game could change your brain, but after you've talked to my son for a while, I think you can see there's a lot of Minecraft hours in that boy. So I'm always trying to figure out sort of how did I get to this place where I'm talking about neuroscience with librarians in Maine, and I'm bringing video games to bear. So how did that start? And again, thank you, Donna, for the nice introduction. It seems like I was sort of upset early on in my career. I was treating these kids, and we would get their symptoms down, but their cholesterol would climb sky high. Their insulin levels would rise. They're turning diabetic before your very eyes. We noticed that adults that took some of these medications, this is early on, sort of the end of med school, beginning of residency, were gaining a great deal of weight. Look at that, 25 pounds with the medication clozapine, which can be a lifesaver if you need a medication like that, but that's a heck of a side effect. In kids, it was even worse. When kids were, this didn't exactly convert that great from PowerPoint to Keynote, but that's a lot of pounds to gain in a very short period of time. So kids were gaining weight at greater rates than adults on the same medications. And I would actually check people's blood pressures, and from week to week I could see stretch marks appearing on arms. It was pretty intense. So again, my son saying to me, of course I'll do my homework in just a couple minutes, but I have to wait till I die, which is nothing a mom really wants to hear. On the other hand, it led me to figure there's something really here. Kids are really attracted to digital media. No surprise. You drew a great brain picture over here, which is really quite awesome. And here's another guy up here. The limbic system is that circuitry that's the reward pathway. I could be giving a lecture on cocaine. I could be giving a lecture on Minecraft. I could be giving a lecture on falling in love, all those really great hedonic things that sort of get you. That's the limbic system lighting up. We want to know, how can we get that limbic system to be on our team, and how can we get that to turn diseases around? So let's see if we can get there. I'm going to give you a sort of success story, a sort of epic fail story, and then something in the middle. So with all humility, there's no real cure for pediatric obesity in these games, and there's no cure for schizophrenia here, but there may be some additional therapeutic benefit. So I'll see if I can convince you. So we've known for a really long time that the SuperFit kids have higher test scores. They're the ones that go to Bowdoin College, right? They're the ones that do well. We know that there's a big correlation between SAT and end of grade test scores. These are 7th graders in California. You can pretty much pick every year between the presidential fitness or any other fitness test. The SuperFit kids seem to be brighter, right? Has everyone noticed that one? We know that in thinking about children and what they need a daily dose of play. And play is the work of children. And on the other hand, you know, there's also a problem with these new digital media that people think that they're kind of a real downer, a real negative. Kids should be outside playing, they should be climbing the trees and getting dirty, and they should be getting their vitamin D, and they shouldn't be sitting inside on the iPad with these hyper addictive, time-sucking, relationship-busting, mind-crushing digital games that are making people very sedentary and very inwardly focused. And I have actually had kids who've needed to be treated for playing World of Warcraft for 45 days straight, not going to high school. I mean, parents have like brought those kids to my office here in Maine and said, you know, doctor, do something. So there are some people that have 3 or 4 standard deviations off the curve. There are some kids that have a real problem. But we also know that kids are digital natives and they think differently. Their neurocognitive style and circuitry is developed differently from ours. So a lot of people are worried that digital media is a menace or this is responsible for violence in society, obesity, and many other ills of society. Have we all heard those arguments? And even my own Academy of Child and Adolescent Psychiatry, and the Academy of Pediatrics for that matter, have a lot of position statements saying, you know, people should have a limit on screen time, and this is bad, and this is negative, and it's a real downer message. It's a real minimized message. When 2004 came around and then the Wii came out, how many of you guys actually went out and bought one for yourself, for your kids or grandkids or anything like that? It was a big blockbuster. It sold really big, and it was going to be the new cool thing. And a friend of mine was a doubting person at that time. She's a real skeptic. She was a public health researcher at UNC at the time, and this was her impression. She is really a funny speaker, and she would say how many treadmills ended up being, or how many exercise bikes ended up being that place where you put that shirt that you just ironed, or it turned into something that was not exercise equipment. So it's nice and warm. I guess her cat likes it. So I always have to say this for the skeptics. But the Kaiser Family Foundation used to do these annual sort of reviews of media, and they haven't done one in a while. So I think 2010 is the latest Kaiser Family Foundation. You're nodding, you know this. So I think it was around 7.6 hours. Like, youth are on screens a lot of the time. So maybe they sleep this much and they go to school this much, and sort of the rest of the time is really digital media. So what are we going to do with that time? How are we going to direct that? And can we direct some of that? So again, child and adolescent psychiatrists have these fact sheets, and we have advice about all kinds of things, bedwetting, fire setting, everything under the sun. But this one is about video games, and it basically says, you know, some of the genres are emphasizing negative themes and promote killing, drugs, criminal behavior, disrespect, etc. And so the Academy's sort of statement is really toward the negative side. It's harm reduction, public health messaging about, you know, this is probably not that good. But it's also in contrast to the 7.6 hours a day business. So what are we to do? So if the pediatricians are saying less than 2 hours of screen time a day, one of the public health campaigns in Maine has always been Let's Go campaign, 5210. Got to get your 5 vegetables and fruits in every day, 2 hours or less of screen time. You know, 1 hour of is the most sedentary activity that you should have at any one time, sedentary screen time, and 0 sweetened beverages. This public health campaign went out from, you know, Calais to Bangor to all over the state of Maine, and it was a big message. But it didn't sync with people because they were saying, my kid is playing 7.6 hours a day like the average kid, and you're saying it should be 1, so what gives? So over the last couple of years, the sort of the grandmother, I'd say, of digital games as a legit enterprise, I started thinking, could we convert some of these things, some of these clinical problems that we're seeing, like the weight gain? And I talked to Deborah Lieberman. She's at UCSB, and she said that at first, this notion of a game made it seem frivolous or entertainment-y or just basically unimportant. But as serious games or games for health and journals came on and more academic meetings, there are probably like 6 academic meetings a year now just on gaming. Some for older drivers or some for different purposes. But it's really a growing area, and I think you'll see more of this in the next couple of years. But she really got us all thinking. Robert Wood Johnson started sponsoring meetings. They sponsored about a decade full of meetings. The Europeans got on board, and the Europeans had a really interesting thing. They decided that they would offer like an XPRIZE, like a €100,000 prize for a really cool game. And they got a lot of people very interested because they had this prize money. So some of us went off to Amsterdam to sort of think about how the Europeans were sort of ahead of us on thinking about digital games. One thing that was interesting, there's really a long wait list. Even in Portland, Maine, there can be up to a 9-month waiting list to even get a diagnosis for autism. That is a delay of that family and that child's ability to sort of get services and get moving forward. And some of these guys at this conference made a game that could help sort of quicken the diagnosis of autism because it had similar features to a diagnostic interview. And so they made a tabletop game that was brilliant, and it wasn't even the top prize winner that year, but it really effectively took a lot of clinical practice and a huge systems issue, the delay to diagnosis, and turned it into a positive solution. It was pretty impressive. I kept seeing these things on TV about Dance Dance Revolution. There were some things in Time magazine and the Today Show and all those really scholarly things. And I thought, you know something, there might be something here, and started talking to people who were in this field and were observing kids and playing these games. And I went to the main mall, and there were these kids standing around playing these games. They were chucking quarters in the machine. And then they had the paper towel dispenser next to them because they were so sweaty that they were wiping off. And they would do this over and over and over. They'd sit there for 3 hours, and they were like, who's the crazy lady over in the corner watching me? And that would be me. And I actually hired one of those teenagers and said, could you come and do a demo? And then there were pre-pilots and pre-pilots and focus groups and on. And finally, we decided to do some clinical trials. And we're able to do a couple of iterations of that. And for those, my mom always showed up, thank you, and helped with snacks and food and consent forms. And so moving forward, we did find out these are really obvious things when you think about them. But if you're sitting down just mashing the thing, you burn a certain number of calories. If you're standing up doing that, you burn more. If you're moving your arms around, more. And if you're whole body dancing, more calories. Everyone gets that. Believe it or not, we had to actually prove that and do a series of studies, right? Lanningham did a lot of those. And then moving forward, could this be something that would work? How would you get an IRB to approve of this? How could you have a grants and contracts department think it was legit to have like $10,000 be spent at the GameStop store at the mall? There were a lot of like really strange situations that came up just doing this kind of research. How do you pay the kids? Did you have them take pictures of their high score? Did you go to their house to monitor them? Did you take their memory card? Measurement was really difficult. And then also just kids like a new toy for a little while, and then 3 days later they're done, or 6 weeks later they're done, and there's sort of built-in obsolescence to games. So you can't imagine that a game's going to work forever, although we want our medicines to work forever. But every 6 weeks or so, a kid's going to want to like swap in that game and get a new game. And also, could I eventually get anyone who is confused or psychotic or unmotivated or sedated to actually do any of this? So we'll see if I could get there. And is there any downside? Do people fall? Do people trip? Do people get paranoid about the camera looking at them? Like, what are the downsides of this? You have to have this room in your living room, and would it make people not do their homework? Would it make people get in fights in their house? If you're in an apartment building, would it bug the people downstairs? There were a lot of different things to think about. But just moving forward, we were able to do one pilot study, and we were sort of amazed that parents, we gave the kids pedometers. Parents went out and bought pedometers to measure their own activity like their kids. Now everyone's like, that's so last year. Everyone's wearing their Fitbits now, right? And they're comparing with each other. But this is sort of a precursor. And we were able to get sort of proof of concept that yes, kids will play these games, normal, healthy kids. So we got that published, we moved forward, we got minority kids in an after-school program to use it. We gave them a machine for home, a machine for at the after-school program. After-school programs were angry. They had an unfunded mandate to have tutoring, but these physical activity sessions, and they didn't know how they were going to get the physical activity. And we said, well, why don't you try our game? So the after-school program adopted the game, and they did the dance program with the kids. And meanwhile, we were watching the pawn shops in town to make sure that they didn't actually cash in their machines for money, because it was a pretty poor town. They didn't. And it was a really, they had an improved fitness finding from that study. So then this is one I did here in Maine, Calais, Old Orchard Beach, Gardner. The schools in the state were really generous. Everyone helped me to get some kids measured and studied. Kids were a little bit overweight, and we didn't have a huge, I'm not going to show you like pre and post BMI changes, but we had some significant changes in the right direction, getting kids more active, and it was pretty cheap. We bought a machine that looked about this big. Schools have, and librarians have carts with TVs on them, and remember those big belts that go around them so they didn't tip over? We would find one of those old machines and set it up, and it seemed to work pretty well. And kids could do this at school. They got about 50 minutes a week of extra activity. That's actually about what you get in 3 or 4 PE classes, because PE classes are 50 minutes long, but you have to suit up or hear the rules or be picked or stand in line or whatever. So you don't really get that many minutes of PE. So it actually worked. We observed a lot of kids playing in labs. So we're behind the one-way mirror there and seeing how kids play. And we're thinking, okay, this might stick. So moving forward, we thought, let's get more daring. Let's go for the really obese kids. So the 96 and up, 95 or 96 percentile and up, really obese kids. They usually had an obese family, and they usually had other barriers. So families in this study were randomized to 2 different conditions: pedometers only, because that seemed to be something that would be okay for families, versus these games. And we did not, in this article we published, we did not have a slam dunk here. We did not have a significant decrease in BMI. Kids felt like they were more active, but when we put monitors on them, not so much. So the self-report was like, yeah, I'm doing it, but it wasn't really significant at all. So we progressed through these 4 studies. We found some sort of key findings. Yes, kids will play the game. They love to play it with their friends. They love to compete with their friends. And the social aspects are actually kind of cool, so I'll give you just a quick slide about a sort of a case study about the place where I work right now and with a clinical population. And there are some real benefits to individuals that might not sort of show up in a clinical trial. But I think that one of the things I was worried about was that there would be these games competing with other things or family time. But we did find in general that kids will do this if you tell them, like, doctor's orders, you have to play this game. They'll be like, okay, I got that, doctor. We actually wrote out individual prescriptions. It was kind of cute. We gave them, sort of a graduation certificate for being in a clinical trial and helping other kids. And they really liked the altruism. At the end, we found out that, at school, the kids would do this instead of study hall or instead of just hanging out in the halls. So it had some uptake. After school was cooler than the homework, of course. And then we also found that duration of treatment, or the duration that sort of lasted, 5 or 6 weeks, and it died off unless you gave them big incentives. Then you could maybe get them out to 12 or 20 weeks. But after that, they really needed a new toy. So that's not going to last forever. It's not going to be a big solution. So many of us have then thought about this. There's a group in Australia, a group in Europe, there's groups all over the country and the world. We got together working on a project, and we said, what were the limitations of the prior research? And then let's write a researcher's paper about what we learned the hard way. And so we published a couple of those papers too. So that's kind of like bearing your errors out to others. It's always a little bit tough for researchers to do that, frankly. But one thing that we noticed too is that the location really matters. Stuart Trust is a really senior researcher, and he said that if you can get kids in the YMCA in a weight management program, and you support them and you coach them, you could really get some weight off. So I guess, again, I didn't find this to be a cure, but this Exergaming was a launch pad to think about how games could be used for other pursuits. Could it change someone's brain fundamentally? Could it help people in a bad situation? And so we needed to think about what were our incentives? Did we keep our incentives going long enough? What were those positive reinforcers? What would, it was classical conditioning. We would, have the grad student go over, and after a while, the kids would start to expect certain things. When the grad student showed up, oh, you're going to bring me a gift card. And there were lots of things that were built into the study that we learned that kids really liked or parents did like or didn't like. For instance, parents didn't like the kind of trashy sounding songs that were on the Dance Dance Revolution, but one of them, who happened to be someone I knew pretty well in the study at the end, she said, if you would just let the parents put on classical music at night and then dance to longer songs. We actually are doing this when our kids are going to bed at night, but we're too embarrassed to do this during the day. So you could have sort of a day program for the kids, and then the parents can dance at night, but you need to give us better songs. So then we figured that one out too. But so we learned a lot of things from focus groups and so on. And then I started becoming more kind of tuned into the larger world. And this is like the librarian networking part of things. I got onto the media committee at my academy, but my media committee was also saying things like, little Einsteins, video do not make your child smarter, and then they were engaged in a lawsuit about that. So they were on the no downer negative side, litigation side, or children shouldn't be exposed to so much horrible rated R and rated X material, which I agree with. But that's also on the no negative downer side, so a lot of this was pushing back on the negatives. So I did find these conferences, and Robert Wood Johnson had this research portfolio, and then I learned about all these databases that were out there. And just as the beginning of a field is a sloppy thing, we didn't really have a home journal, we didn't really have home conferences, we had more meta-analyses than we had actual studies. Now let me just say that one more time, that is so ridiculous. People are writing and writing, publishing and perishing to write review papers, but then there's more of those than there are of the primary, right? So I see someone really nodding back there, like, wow. And that really tells you that's the birth of a very new field, which doesn't have its roots yet, right? So stick with us. So when we talked to these folks at the IOC, they were very interested in having the company that makes their video games incorporate some role models, like Katniss with her archery. They wanted to get the games and then people's inspiration going to see if they can get the active games on the new games, because they put out video games every year. I didn't know that, but they do that for every Olympiad. And this was an incredible bunch of people. This is a group of folks there's a bunch here from the World Health Organization, and they're deploying video games. They're deploying SMS servers that are up in satellites to give quit smoking text messaging games to people in Costa Rica. Who knew? And there are so many applications worldwide that we heard about from folks at the UN and WHO that got together with game developers that really were mind-blowing. So I think for the Rio Olympics, we will see some games coming out. They may have some aspects that get people moving more. So there might have been sort of a more of a global spread with this. So we've seen lots of games. The games are not usually as much as the actual activity. So if you play tennis and you're running around trying to be Serena Williams, you're going to burn a lot more calories than playing Wii tennis. And everyone sort of gets that. But on a rainy day or on a day, well, we had 100 inches of snow in Worcester this year. So there are a lot of barriers to get kids getting outside. So it makes sense to have these indoor opportunities as well. So maybe you get light or moderate activity, and you can't say that you're getting all that cardiorespiratory fitness, and it's probably not going to meet all the guidelines and make everyone happy, but it's better than nothing, right? So there have been review upon review and systematic review, and people are saying this could be good and could be healthy for ordinary kids that are typically developing, and I would argue then also for some of the kids who have more serious mental challenges. And here's like my little case study. I always like a case study. I work in a residential treatment facility in Worcester. It's at Worcester State Hospital, now called Worcester Recovery Center and Hospital. And it's a 30-bed locked residential for kids who've had 5 or 10 or sometimes even 20 previous hospitalizations. They're teenagers that are very, very sick. And there's this one youth there. He was there for a while. He stayed for a long time. His medications, along with metformin, which is diabetes medicine, took off a little bit of weight, but then we brought in the game Just Dance, and it's sort of a free-form dancing game. You don't have to really dance on the dance pad. And he sort of did it every day after school. He had a really significant change in his sort of self-esteem. Felt better, felt free again. He gave me a quote about sort of pre and post. And we don't have enough gym classes. We don't have enough gyms or opportunities for these kids usually. That's not really funded. But he had this great impact of just this game, which is probably, we bought it used for like $8, right? So most people would think that is pretty much of a home run. And then switching gears kind of entirely to a population that's vulnerable. If you think about kids at the group home level or at the locked residential facility where I work, they're vulnerable. If something bad happens, most of us can get out of the way. There was some Hurricane Katrina money that came through that came through the IRB. Remember that funding, that stimulus package? After Katrina, there were some funds that were made available for people to make trainings better, more effective, because a lot of people left behind at Katrina were individuals who had dogs or disabilities or thought they were going to tough it out, but a lot of people ended up dying. And when they looked back, it was a lot of the vulnerable people with mental illnesses. So then money was put into doing an e-learn or a Blackboard or some kind of training. Now, how many of you in your jobs have to do some kind of e-learn or annual review or safety, something other? And do not dread those after a while. I mean, they are very, very boring. So we decided to make that into a more game-like atmosphere, that you were kind of collecting points or badges or coupons or tokens, and that you could pit yourself against another team. And that actually did make it more interesting. So we had some pilot money to just make this game. So it was through NICHD. And we hired a game designer. And that doesn't always work out. And game companies have cajillions of dollars to make really fabulous games that are going to be blockbusters, like Halo or Grand Theft Auto, and they have huge R&D teams. And we had about this much federal money, right? So we did what we could. And I put this little bullet point in there about how we wrote a grant, we had a team, we got a designer. We had a culture clash. The gamer dude was like at Starbucks, and we were Skyping him and trying to get him to sort of build code for us. And we were like, nerd researchers trying to like, where's our p-value? We're all freaking out over here. And we made a game with just a little bit of money that wasn't so fun. And how do I know it wasn't very fun? I asked my son to play it. He said no. I said, how about $5? And he says, no way. And then it was like $10 maybe, and I actually had to pay him $20 to play it. So that's pretty bad. And so you could say that was maybe an epic fail, but it was some level of engagement with gaming and training and learning and thinking about how to rescue vulnerable kids. So it was an interesting thing, and it helped me get the other side of the equation. So by Dance Dance Revolution, we flogged that game for about 6 years in our research team, and that was just something off the shelf. And this is time we tried to make a game, and boy, is that a hard thing to do, right? And plus, by the time you buy it, it's sort of done. Like now, people just build apps in the weekend, put them on the iTunes store by Monday, and some people are millionaires, some people are not. But there's such a different culture that even in the last 7 years, development of games has just radically changed. And probably federally funded researcher geeks like us are not really in the greatest position to make those kind of games. I surrender. So we built the game. We had some EMS firefighters and all kinds of people test it. Some people said I wouldn't pay a penny for this, and some people were like, 99 cents in the App Store, I would buy this. And then there was actually a fire department chief, though, that said, I would spend a few $100s to play this because it's better than Blackboard, e-learn, like pulling teeth. So then switching gears completely here, I wanted to just talk a little bit about the neuroscience behind brain training games. Has everyone kind of heard about Brain Age or the brain training games are on NPR? They advertise heavily. Has everyone heard about those games that are out there? There's people that believe that, if you just play that New York Times crossword puzzle every day, you're going to stave off dementia, or my mom's big on the crypto. And there's a lot of different games out there that people think are going to sort of hold it back, right? And so again, thinking about the primary situation, the secondary effect of changing kids' self-esteem and willingness to take medicines, if you could offset their weight gain with the game, they'd be more willing to take their antipsychotic medication. But what if there was actually a game that fundamentally changed the disease state itself, the really mixed up brain? A child who has schizophrenia is a really troubled kid. They're usually a year or two behind in school. They usually don't have anyone coming to their birthday party. And they usually have parents that have had to give up work to actually minister to their child and shepherd them around to appointments. And kids who have schizophrenia have a pretty hard life. And so we're wondering, can we actually impact that illness using a game? So we know that again, the ERA grants came out and a stimulus grant came out, and we thought, is there a way to impact neurocognition? We were seeing in the adult literature for schizophrenia some promising things. This genius guy, Michael Merzik, who he was sort of one of the guys on the original team to map out the cochlear implant and to map out neurons cell by cell. He and his team had created a company that was making video games that they were saying were really helpful. So we went to sort of figure this out. We were also sort of confused by the whole thing, because when you apply for a study at a university, you have to say, are you testing a drug or a device? And we were sort of like, none of the above, a game. So going to the IRB was sort of confusing for everyone. And then they wanted to know, is your game going to be FDA approved? And would that have to go through the ordinary, phase 1, phase 2, phase 3 levels and steps? What a mess. And so, but it turns out that some people are actually trying to get their game through the FDA, and some of those are going on now. Has anyone actually heard about this, or is this sort of a new area of? So people are creating sort of software and hardware that is being sort of channeled through, what's there, which is the Food and Drug Administration, but doesn't really fit. I think you were saying before, you're writing grants to this institute or this center or this place, you're reading journals over here, but then this thing that you're doing is sort of in the middle. And I can really relate to that, because I feel like a lot of the things that we're doing with using gaming for therapeutics, it sounds frivolous at first, so then you have to sort of get over that, and then you have to figure out what institute. Is this child development? Is this neurosciences? Is this which research area would fund this? Is NSF interested in this? So I think you probably have a lot of, maybe desperate is too hard of a word to say, but doesn't it seem like there are a lot of really smart investigators right now having a very hard time getting funding? And they're looking to get very creative, and they're looking with all of us for what's that fundable area? What's the next cool thing? What's the next fundable thing? And so this has been a tricky one, because we don't have that many calls for proposals. So we looked at some effective strategies that had been used in adults, but we could only draw from the literature that was on veterans, and the VA guys will go to the lab and do what you want, because they're sort of military trained guys. Even when they have schizophrenia, they'll follow the rules and they'll sort of do anything for $10 or for some cigarettes. So what we had as a template was a very well done study from UCSF, where a very good bunch of games were used, but a very captive audience, a bunch of men that would just like clockwork go to the lab on time, and they would march in orders, and they would stay and do the video game, and they had pretty robust findings. And this is sort of my segue to show you that when we did this in children, not so much. We didn't. So looking back on it, you can certainly learn a lot. So what we wanted to do was to impact kids with schizophrenia. And just to review the criteria here, the DSM-4 or 5, people are sort of switching over right now, point to delusions, hallucinations, and disorganized speech. So kids have multimodal hallucinations. They hear and see things, or smell and taste things. There's a lot of things going on for kids, because it's really a developing nervous system. So they have a different impact of the same illness at a younger age. How many people here actually know a child who has, or a teenager who has schizophrenia? Does anyone? There are some people here. And there might be some kids that that haven't really declared themselves yet, or the stigma is so great that families haven't sort of come out about that. But it's considered sort of rare, and yet not really, because we're able to recruit and retain sizable samples for this kind of thing. So people in the old textbooks used to say things like 1 in 10,000. That is really just not the case. It's probably like 2 in 100, unfortunately, and there's a lot more of it than we thought. So with schizophrenia, there is an early onset, and half of all of those adult serious mental illnesses declare themselves around age 12, half before and half after. So we do see kids with schizophrenia, and they have all these symptoms. We measure them by this thing called the PANSS, Positive and Negative Symptom Scale. And this is always tricky, because as you point out, this is the diseased organ telling you what's wrong with it. We're doing an interview-based thing. We don't have that many neural markers. We don't have any good biomarkers to really measure this in clinical care. So there's some tricky parts here. And the way we think about schizophrenia is that there are genes and environment interactions, and that there are neural systems that have disconnected problems. And what happens is that as a child is in these different stages of their life, they might miss key developmental windows where they might not hear things well, or when you show the Ekman face recognition test, they might sort of miss out because they were so distracted by hallucinations that they sort of miss a lot of things about social cueing. And so kids with schizophrenia really have a lot of deficits. So then they end up looking different, and they can be prodromal for a period of time until everyone finally recognizes that they have a serious mental illness. So this is a slide from Jeff Lieberman, early research mentor of mine, and he said, you know, we know that there's something probably going on before birth, and that there is a period of, the bottom section here sort of talks about the neurons and what's going on in the brain, but there's a period of time over time when you get to adolescence where there's something funny going on, something's just not right, they're a little out of sync with their peers, and then they go on to have a first episode and then a progressive illness. So the thought is there something that we can do to change this progression? I had to show a brain picture, had to. And of course, what we do know about brain structure and function is that the kids who go on to develop schizophrenia have very different cortices, cortical thickness is different, and deep brain structures both are quite different. The back of the brain, as she pointed out over here, the occipital area is the yellow area here. So this is flipped. Oh no, it's the same for you guys. And auditory hallucinations, which are very common and very disturbing and very distracting for teenagers and kids, are probably in the deeper thalamic nuclei. But we were impressed. We saw this VA study where they were trying to get the veterans to play a certain game a certain number of hours over a certain number of weeks, and with success, they were getting brain-derived neurotrophic factor. In other words, they were getting a blood test to see are neurons getting connected, and they were able to show, compared to a control game, the blue line, that the folks in the pink line getting this treatment game, the really good game made by Michael Merzik and his group by Posit Neurosciences, those guys were getting a real dose of something, and it was changing their brain, and you could get a blood test to prove it. And I'm not sure if people in the room know that there's sort of blood tests in psychiatry. This is a kind of a new area, and I think biomarkers that really show or prove something would be really awesome for our field, right? If we had a blood test or a test that would show something or a change. In psychiatry, we're kind of continuously dogged by the fact that we don't have hard and fast laws. Does this person have celiac disease, yes or no, in a blood test? Do you have Lyme disease, yes or no? I mean, we know that medicine is a complicated thing, but we sure wish we had some blood tests. So we were hoping that this brain-derived neurotrophic factor would be sort of this breakthrough. It's prevalent, and it's sort of like, people call it the miracle grow for brains, or in the popular parlance, it's sort of thought of as a neuro-regulating differentiation sort of hormone. And the evidence in knockout mice is that there's a lot of impairment when mice do not have this present. And over the last few years, this blood test has become sort of the hot new thing in studying other serious illnesses like depression and bipolar, etc. So we wondered if we could get kids to do this. Would kids take these laptops home? Would they play as much as the veterans played? Would they use the laptop for other things like Facebook? Or what would they exactly do with these laptops? We wanted to know if these kids would submit to this blood work, and we had to do the blood work a lot, along with neurocognitive testing and legit memory testing. We had a lot of good testers available that were blinded to the study condition and tested the kids serially. So what we did was we were counting on the idea that the game itself seizes upon plasticity. The concept here is if the brain is continuously growing, there used to be sort of an old dogma that your heart was built and then it never changed, and all the heart cells that you had were that for life. That's not really true anymore. We figured that that's not true. We always thought your brain sort of developed till age 25 or 30, and then that was sort of it, and then it was a downhill slide after that, and things weren't getting any better. But we really know now, based on a lot of things like how the taxi drivers in London have these enlarged areas of the brain that just keep getting better and better when they know the map of London by heart. We know that if a person has a stroke and another area sort of takes over and makes something stronger and better. We know from even kids who have huge brain tumors where they take out loads of brain mass that the rest of the brain figures stuff out and remaps and reroutes things. So the hope here is this idea of neuroplasticity, and that we could actually make compensatory changes. So we got this pilot study, we copied the study of Fisher, and we tried to replicate this. We were hoping to get this in 40 or maybe even 60 kids. We weren't able to recruit very, very readily. It was difficult. We had these areas that were supposed to build auditory processing speed or visual processing speed, and also something about those Ekman faces. We actually showed kids different faces and said, is this a happy person? Is this person really mad at you? Is this person think you just stole something from them? We gave them scenarios to try to guess the person's face. And then we had to also pick placebo games, which if you think about it, if you're going to do a placebo-controlled study, what video game is out there that's sort of like these games? Not much. So we did this, big shopping trip to Target and Walmart, and we went online and we tried to find games that would simulate the other games, but they're very different. These kids are the digital natives that I told you about that were born after 1985, and they crave really, really intensive, fast graphics that were really awesome. And we were making games that were not really awesome. And someone actually told us that our game was a little bit like cognitive waterboarding. So, so that was kind of a downer. Anyway, so it wasn't that fun. I would have had to pay my son like $50 to play this game. Anyway, so the game was not that fun, but we wanted to replicate the other study that had been successful. We wanted to determine whether or not we could make an impact on auditory and visual processing, executive functioning, and we had various ways of testing that in these kids who had schizophrenia who were teenagers. And the idea, again, was that these poorly regulated patterns of cortical activity, as difficulty increases, would be impacted, that the areas of impaired function were probably at the earliest stages of processing. I'm going to attempt now to make a very strange sound, which is about one of the auditory processing games. You would have headset on, really good Koss headphones from Milwaukee, Wisconsin, where I'm from, and the Koss headphones would be on, and you would be listening very carefully for a sweep, and the sweep would go whoop, which is sort of upward, or whoo, down, and they would become very, very close together, and they would become extremely hard to tell apart. So after a period of time, you would play these games until you got quicker and quicker, and then you'd sort of get a diagnosis, or you'd get a speed of processing. And it was thought that, that we were making some impact. The folks who have schizophrenia spectrum disorders really always have shown these reduction in different cell densities and in different circuits, and we were hoping to make an impact there. The games were this high-low business that I just tried to attempt. There were some matching sound relays. So 8 games about auditory processing, another 6 games that were about visual processing. A lot of them were sort of memory type games where things would move around and you'd have to keep your eye on one of the fish. Where did it go? Oh, behind that rock. Oh, that it just came out. That's the fish you're looking for. Don't get distracted by other things like the gorilla. So there were a lot of things having to do with sensory sort of gating and filtering. And then these cognitive modules. And drum roll, so we hoped for 60. We only got 22 randomized. Notice that the light blue are the light blue, the top section there, those are the control kids. And then the kids down below were the kids that were affected by schizophrenia spectrum illness. Half of them dropped out. That's how bad our game was. And unfortunately, there's no labels on this, but you can see there were really no changes in these brain-derived neurotrophic factors. So in other words, that did not replicate the adult patients at all, and we were sort of stuck wondering sort of what about the study wasn't well executed. Are children just so different? Were these games just such a bummer? How come we couldn't get the dose? How come we couldn't keep kids in the study? So again, that taught us a lot of things. Fortunately, the grant mechanism was an R34, which is sort of a high risk, high reward, pre experiment. And so that was a more, I guess you would say, forgiving part of the NIH funding cycle. And they wanted us to learn from our mistakes. And so that's what we humbly are doing and proclaiming that. So we will definitely be discussing and publishing our null hypothesis, which we support sometimes, even though there's a lot of bias about that out there. Don't we all know that? So I think one of the things that we've noticed too, and I was much happier to realize that the idea that some people with schizophrenia, older adults, also can have health benefits from exercise, as you pointed out in your slides. You know, there are a lot of things that boost memory, and one of them is exercise. So just the other day, a group of nurses from UCSF sort of replicated one of my studies. They said they studied adherence to a video game-based physical activity program in older adults with schizophrenia. So I think that people are attempting to get physical activity to a group of people that has a bad disease, a lot of years on them, right? And they're also extremely challenged. People who have schizophrenia actually die about 25 years younger than people without schizophrenia. And there's a lot of challenges in their lives. They are more obese, more sedentary, have more secondhand smoke, or are smokers. They don't get their annual exams like the rest of us. They have a lot of disadvantages because of their illness. And it's thought that some of this can be turned around. So I'm really glad to see that some people are using, in this case, they used the Sony Xbox game, and they used the Kinect and the 360. And they were hoping for older adults with schizophrenia to attend a possible of 180 minutes of an exercise group. And they did pretty well. They got 139 minutes out of 180. They must have had better cookies than we did, but they certainly had a group of people that were dedicated and helped the older adults exercise, which we know has a lot of positive effects. Effects for bone, effects for memory, effects for self-esteem, and the social aspects. They probably weren't measuring, but I can tell you some of the people that played this game probably had some really nice social benefits from that. So right now, there are gaming conferences about exergaming. There are other conferences for neuro rehab. Allstate has purchased some of the better driving games for some of its insured older drivers, and they're giving it out for free because some insurance companies say, this game is so good and it cuts down on so many accidents that it's worth it. So we're just giving it to people. Pennsylvania was a pilot state for that. So there are conferences that seem to be focused on physical activity. There are neurocognitive conferences, but they seem to be in different spaces. At UMass Med, there seem to be a lot of people into mobile health or M-health. And they seem, Sherry Pagoda and those guys, they all go to the M-health conferences. They're all into the mobile. But of course, most people in the room have an iPhone in their pocket, right? So most of these games are going to smaller platforms. And I think there's a lot of potential there. But these conferences are kind of all over the place. And there are a few conferences and few posters at my home group, of course, is Child and Adolescent Psychiatrist. So, and I don't see people that interested in games at that. When you go to give a poster or a talk or a proposal, there's no category for cool game for this population. It hasn't been accepted yet. American Public Health Association has some sessions and some debates. There have been some calls for proposal from CDC or Department of Defense. The DoD is mostly interested in making good soldiers and also combating PTSD. So they have a lot of games right now that help returning soldiers or actually to pre-inoculate you to stress before you go to battle. So there are games that have multi-sensory features, smelling, seeing, experiencing some of the wartime things that you might come in contact with. And the DoD is actually really advanced in this area. They have a research arm called DARPA, and the DARPA folks are all over this. And they have a lot of simulators, a lot of games that help for help-seeking behavior. A lot of veterans come back, and we are all aware of the suicide rate that's very high for returning soldiers. We know that a lot of people, a lot of men have a very hard time asking for help or getting help with their PTSD. So they have sort of a personal trainer, coach type guy. There's a game that's been made by a cognitive neurotherapeutics gaming company. They have a simulated sort of therapist that sort of gets you keyed into your own mental health issues. And if you sort of warm up with this simulated guy therapist, it's a little easier to go to an actual real therapist. So there are some risky areas in this. I think a risky area is, I'll give you an example. There was a kid in one of our studies had a laptop. We were wanting her to play this game. We were trying to get data on how she was playing the game. Well, she was at 2 and 3 and 4 a.m., on Facebook or Instagram or whatever. And at a certain point I thought, I wonder if she's off her lithium. Like, she's not sleeping at all. It's been 3 days. But I was snooping to see what she was up to and when she was playing my game for my study. But I thought, something, this seems like she might be in a risky place because she may not be taking her meds. Maybe her parents think she is, but she's up all night, I can tell. So I wonder if I should call somebody, or I wonder if I should do something. So this is a newer, riskier area for child psychiatrists because we don't really have a lot of protocols about how to do these kind of studies that take place in someone's home. And again, we're always up against the folks that say that this is just entertainment or this is just really expensive and that this isn't a serious thing. But I do believe there was a White House conference to talk about, there was actually a White House person that was dedicated to gaming And there was a big summit at the White House, and a lot of the big go-to players in this field went there and talked to President Obama about sort of having a gaming agenda. Now, there are a couple of journals now that are peer-reviewed and do have sort of a very multidisciplinary editorial board. Some of the folks in these journals are really esteemed in other fields. There's someone who is involved with physical rehab for stroke, for amputees and so on, and she's seized upon these games and really shown that the impact of using games gets people really warmed up more quickly to physical therapy, or possibly even more distracted and more engaged. They'll have bigger range of motion using games like the Wii game, like the bowling game, to get people more mobile. There are a lot of applications that are pretty exciting in games for health. There's a lot of quit smoke. I gave an entire 1-hour talk in Maine not that long ago about just quit smoking apps. There are so many games and apps just for quitting smoking. So there are lots of different areas. This one is a special focus issue of games for health in Asia. And so there's a lot of people, these games like Konami's Dance Dance Revolution were developed in Asia, and they're way ahead of us in certain areas, and their games and their graphics have advanced more, so there's a lot for us to learn. So it's a pretty interesting journal. And then this other one, Cyber Psychology, this has a lot of the applications I was telling you about with the military and PTSD and soldiers and recovery are in that journal. So these are new and young and not PubMed yet, and impact factor in the 0.000001 range. And but stay tuned. So I think this is coming up. Just wanted to make everyone aware of what I'd say the most academically rigorous of the 7 databases out there is the one at University of California at Santa Barbara. Again, Deborah Lieberman is she's a real leader in this field, and she has the database set up that you can put in a disease state. See in the keyword section there. You could put in diabetes or multiple sclerosis. You could put in memory. You could put in bullying. You can actually put in autism. And the one that's been kind of mind-blowing for me in the last few weeks is sex ed. There are a lot of safer sex games out there that are really looking promising and have had pretty rigorous studies. So, so stay tuned. This ended up being kind of funny in the conversion of PowerPoint to Keynote. But a lot of people ask me at the end of my talks, they come up to me afterwards and confide in me that their kid plays Minecraft like 73 hours a week. And they always want me to say, is this okay, or is this horrible, or is that person a really bad parent? And I would have to say that that's one of my most popular questions I get asked. So I thought I'd just tell everyone that I think that Minecraft has a lot of positives, and that Minecraft has been adapted in a lot of classrooms to teach a lot of things. And I'm not too worried about that one. And has anyone ever played Minecraft or watched a kid play Minecraft? Yeah, it's extremely engaging. It's a creative sandbox type game. And obviously it shouldn't be the only thing that your kid does, but I'm not too worried about it. And so then I also wanted to just put out there that as a result of just sitting and listening to her great talk and the ideas about these games, you might have ideas, and I'm all ears. I'm always looking for collaborators or good ideas or things that I've overlooked. And so I wanted people to know how to get in contact with me at UMass Med. And also a shout out to mentors along the way. I think Jean Fraser was here a couple years ago to talk about neurosciences. Cliff Rosen is here at Maine Med and at Jackson Lab. He's an outstanding investigator, and he's taught me a lot over the years and has just been a complete mensch. Tom Baranowski is the editor of the Games for Health Journal, and he's really brought me into the fold for a lot of great opportunities academically, and somehow got me to Switzerland for the IOC, which was really great. I took the family and the kids, and we went skiing at Zermatt, so that was pretty fabulous. And Lynn Sikich, a mentor and collaborator, also wanted to thank the hundreds of study participants. And that's a lot of people here in Maine, people in Massachusetts and North Carolina. And another shout out to the mom who came for all the study days and helped me handle the research subjects. And some of them will come through with whole families, 70, 80, 90 people coming through to be registered for trials, and that's a lot of work. And also shout out to Dina, who's not here from Maine Med. library. Also, my local librarians like Len and Sally, and now I have new friends today, Don and Regina. And I just wanted to say thanks to all of you guys, and I'm able to take any questions that you have.